Now then guys, so in this video we're going to talk about 7 strength exercises for fell runners. So fell runners is a specific type of running, but what I will say is that these exercises will also be of great benefit to any other sort of runner really, even from a road runner, but also certainly for trail runners or any other sort of mountain runners, and also potentially for climbers, you know, hikers, mountain bikers, you know, people who spend time in the hills. These exercises are going to be very relevant for you too, but specifically I'm going to talk in relation to fell runners, and that's kind of where the thought behind it has come from. So essentially what I'll be offering here is 7 different categories of exercises that you should be including in your training in order to be a stronger, more robust fell runner. And what I'll do is I'll give you some ideas of what specific exercises you can do. Now the reason why I'm going to do that is because essentially no exercise is perfect for everyone, right? And also in terms of equipment and availability, there may be some that just aren't possible for you. So I always find it's good to give people options. So say this is the category of movement that we're looking for, but here are some options that you can do that suit you. Okay, and that's kind of how I'll try and go about this video. So to start with, we're going to start out with the basics, and we're going to say a squat. Okay, so I think a squat should be a part of any fell runner's strength and conditioning program. It's a great exercise to develop strength in the legs, specifically the quads, but also for the hip musculature as well. Maybe not quite so much, but still significantly so. And it's a great way of overloading, you know, our force production. We're not really going to get that so much from many other exercises. So a squat is a great way and a reasonably safe way of exerting ourselves to close to failure, but also using quite a lot of load as well in order to make them force production adaptations that we're looking for. So things like strengthening our tendons, ligaments, and also just giving us a stronger legs as well, stronger knees, and so on, which you'll know that you need for the time in the hills there. Generally speaking, in doing squat variations, you can start with something like a goblet squat or a box squat, okay, and then you could introduce the barbell. You could start with a barbell box squat, so you've got that box to go down to and back up. Also, if you've got access, you can use the pins as well, and then you can safely lower the bar to the pins if you start to lose your position, or you start to you're not able to work up again, or you don't have a spotter. And then from there, sometimes I'll introduce front squats as well, if somebody's got the flexibility, or they can also do the alternative with it along here, or use straps. I find them quite good for just adding a little bit more loading to the knees. Generally there you stay a bit more upright, the knees travel a little bit further forwards. And then finally I might also look at raising the heels as well, so that knee travels even further forwards, becomes even more of a knee dominant lift, and certainly for our downhill running, that can be quite beneficial there. Generally speaking, for our squats, I'll keep the reps reasonably low. I'm not looking to cause too much fatigue and too much, I'm not looking to build muscular endurance so much in the legs with exercises like squats, looking more again for that maximal force output from an exercise such as that. The next one, again sticking with the basics, is going to be our deadlift. Many variations of a deadlift. Romanian deadlift is a really nice one if you want to really load up the posterior chain and emphasize that hamstring specifically, although they can make you quite sore, so you maybe want to structure them around your harder running days, so you've got a few days to recover after them. But I'm a big fan of the trap bar deadlift for runners because it's a very easy lift to learn. It's quite intuitive. If you're going to pick a couple of heavy objects up, it's kind of similar to that. You don't have to worry about getting around the knees, which is kind of a difficult thing with a regular deadlift. But that's also not to say that a regular deadlift isn't good enough. I just do tend to like using the trap bar in my coaching practice. And from there, similar in terms of the squat, it's going to obviously place more demand on the hip musculature, which you're gonna require a fair amount of that. Certainly, running uphill, but also in terms of the impact downhill as well. When you initially strike the ground, if you're going quite a steep climb, you are generally going to heel strike. So that initial impact going through the heel, through the hamstring, through into the glute and back, is going to be quite intense. So if you can build up that strength and that ability to withstand high forces in them muscles and connective tissues, then it's only going to help. And again, reasonably low rep ranges here, emphasis on gradually increasing the load as long as technique allows. So moving on from them, we're now going to talk about ballistics. So ballistics essentially are movements that are done typically loaded, but where the emphasis is on moving it really fast. Okay, so some examples might be a power clean or any sort of dumbbell or kettlebell clean. That could be a good ballistic, or a snatch would be suitable too. too. However, snatch is probably a little bit more upper body as well, and requires quite strong shoulders, so it might limit the amount of load you can use based on how strong your shoulders are. So I tend to favour the clean for runners. Then we've got our loaded jumps options as well. That could be a trap bar jump, a kettlebell jump, dumbbell jumps, anything along these lines. We've also got things like kettlebell swings, slams with a medicine ball, and any movements like this, even like sandbag work where we're really explosively trying to bring that sandbag up onto our shoulders. This would be a fine option too. Also, I would put in that category things like your broad jumps and your box jumps, where essentially you're not using a stretch shorten cycle too much. It's more about producing force from more of a static position. So, you don't have them short ground contacts like you would have in something like plyometrics, which we'll cover. So yeah, your ballistics, I think, want to be a part of your programming. You could put them, normally towards the start of the session, certainly if it's an Olympic lift or a loaded jump, but if it's a swing or a slam, that could maybe come a little bit later because the complexity isn't maybe quite as high. But yeah, again, in terms of rep ranges there, I'd maybe probably stay, 8 to 10 as a maximum, and maybe working more around the kind of 5 rep range there. And the intent wants to be moving the weight very, very fast. If you start to slow down, stop the set, you're no longer working on that explosive force production. So you just kind of then grind the reps out, which isn't really the focus of a ballistic exercise. Next up, really, really important, would be our plyometrics, right? So plyometrics are anything with a very short ground contact time. Similar in terms of intent maybe as a ballistic, but what we're trying to work on here is that spring and the stiffness around our ankles, knees and hips, specifically, talking about the feet and ankles though. And I guess this is why so much money gets invested in footwear as well, because you're trying to find footwear that's more economic. And if you can have more springy tendons, if you like, around your lower leg, then that is going to help you to be more economic. So you require less energy to do the same amount of work, or more work requiring less energy. So plyometrics that you can include, your linear jumps, so forwards, backwards, really, really good on 2 legs. You can do a lateral, so side to side movement for us fell runners, where you're going to have all sorts of different foot positions that you're going to have to work through, inside, outside, or one way and then the other way. So that'll be medial and lateral. You can do split, so in a split position, and you can exchange limbs, or you can stay in that split position throughout, doing that with a very springy upright movement, but also you can do that in a lunge variation as well. And hops as well, which is your single leg variations. Hops similar to your jumps. You could go forwards, backwards, onto a small object, side to side. Again, just changing that foot position to try and really prepare your feet and ankles and balance for all sorts of different terrain that you might experience as a fell runner. And then finally, you can also think about depth and drop jumps, specifically for your downhill work, where obviously there's going to be very, very high impact as you're coming downhill. So you can step off a box, you can start by just landing, and then you can step off a box into a very springy jump, or you can step off a box and try and jump as high as you can, or jump as far as you can. These are all really good variations to help adapt and prepare yourself for these sort of demands that you'd have from running hard downhill. And of course, if you're very advanced, you can start to work on single leg variations of them as well, which would be more specific. If it was a bound, for example, where you're going from one leg to the other of your running action, if you really want to overload it, you can obviously go one leg and then land on that one leg again, and that'll be a way of overloading the leg there in order to really adapt for that sort of downhill action. So that's 3 to go. No specific order as well, by the way, and there might be some that you want to work on more than others, or need to work on more than others, depending on what your strengths and weaknesses are. But the next one we're going to talk about is single leg, for obvious reasons. Single leg examples would be things like a split squat, rear foot elevated split squat as well, single leg RDL, or variations of, step downs or step ups, and also things like single leg calf raises or single leg isometrics as well I find really useful, like a single leg wall sit, maybe a lunge isometric, and you can also do an overcoming isometric or a pushing isometric where you're pushing up against an immovable object like the rig, but these are all great variations to work on improving that force capacity on one leg, improving your stability on one leg as well. So yeah, obviously single leg, that's what we do in running, it's one leg to another, so no surprise that would be a category there, but again, the aim wants to be improving force production on one leg and making sure we're well balanced and our movement is good on one leg, so we're able to track our knee over our middle toe keep good trunk positions, etc. So this is kind of what we're looking at for our single leg work, and the isometrics can be a great way of really working on that force capacity or working on that endurance in a specific position, like the single leg wall sit, for example. Next up, we've got trunk, and I'd also put hips into that category as well. So things like leg lowers or knee raises, where we're working on the hip flexor and kind of lower abdominals. This would be great, certainly if we're going uphill a lot, or if we're running in the bog, right? And there's not much spring coming from the ground, so you've got to use them hip flexors to pull them legs up. Things like anti-extension work generally, so things where we're trying to resist extension, okay, at the trunk, working them sort of front rectus abdominis muscles. Same could be said for anti-flexion as well, which would be like a deadlift, for example, where you're resisting the urge to flex. And this might be good for sort of uphill work if you do find that you get real rounded as going uphill, but again, it's probably likely just due to a lot of fatigue. Single leg hip thrusts, I would put in that category as well, which is really glute and hamstring dominant exercise. I'm a big fan of them for runners and fell runners specifically with that hard downhill efforts. Anti-rotation and anti-lateral flexion work, so things like our bird dogs or crawls, suitcase carries, suitcase lunges, these sort of things can be really nice to work on that ability to sort of sustain a good trunk position. And then finally, and really importantly for a lot of people, the hip abduction and hip adduction, so coming in adduction, coming out abduction, and really important to strengthen their muscles as well. Again, when you're on the trail and on the fells, there's going to be all sorts of different movements happening for the hip. I know if I find it's real boggy and my feet keep slipping out, I can get quite a lot of fatigue happening around my hip. So these sort of movements as well can be really beneficial to make sure we're nice and strong around the hip itself. Finally, upper body, and again, this list is not in any order. I think upper body is a really valuable piece to our fell running strength and conditioning. There is some arguments for that which I would make, which would be, in terms of posture and structural balance, if you like. It's nice to feel like you've got a well-supported body and you know how to brace and push through different positions in your body. But also, if you're going to hit the floor, if you're going to take a fall and your hands first, which is a normal reaction for us, would you rather have strong shoulders or not? I would rather have strong shoulders. I might be in a little bit better place to deal with that fall better or withstand some of the forces of taking a fall on my hands. Things like if you want to get into scrambling and climbing as well, would you rather be strong getting into that or in your upper body or not? I know what I'd rather be. So yeah, there's a few reasons there, and also just long term in terms of your career. You might not be a fell runner forever. You might want to specialise in a different sport. You might want to get more into climbing. You might already climb. I know mountain biking requires good upper body strength as well. So there's a few reasons there why I think it's beneficial. So in terms of upper body, you're not looking to put too much muscle mass on the upper body for sure, because it's not going to make you the most efficient runner. So essentially you want to be keeping them rep ranges nice and low. Certainly the set volume, not too many sets. But also, not too many reps in a set as well, and try and work on that load progression and work on that nice full range of motion through the upper body, pressing overhead, pulling horizontally, doing your pull-ups, maybe doing some, I'm a big fan of push-ups as well, loaded push-ups, these sort of movements where, they're quite dynamic, lots of different joints are moving at once. I tend to favour these, overhead press, another great example, as opposed to kind of your more isolated movements for runners, because it does also bring in that trunk control as well. But the bottom line is, I think just some decent quality upper body training, trying to emphasise getting stronger, is a great addition to your strength and conditioning as a fell runner. So that's it. That's our 7 categories: squat, deadlift, ballistics, plyometrics, single leg, trunk and hip, and then finally upper body. So 7 different movement categories there that you can analyse and think, am I doing them in my training? Hopefully I gave you some options as well in terms of exercises that you can do. If you, of course, have any questions or have any disagreements, feel free to post them in the comments. Strength and conditioning for fell running or even trail runners, it's quite a niche thing, right? There's not a lot of information out there on this sort of thing. So, if we can have these discussions, hopefully it'll improve our knowledge base. So yeah, thanks very much for watching. Hope this video was helpful, and I look forward to seeing you again.